Scientists have always conducted animal experiments in the name of science. Many of them have benefited humanity. Some have helped us learn about social processes in our society, and some are shocking in their inhumanity. Let's take a look at the most astonishing ones. You've probably seen this footage already. In 1997, scientists managed to grow a human ear on the back of a mouse. They used cartilage cells for this. Even in that pre-internet era, the image of the mouse ear went viral. There were many protests against genetic engineering. Strangely enough, the experiment had nothing to do with genetic engineering, because a couple of decades later, it turned out that you could even grow ears on an apple. Canadian researcher Andrew Pelling from the University of Ottawa cut blanks out of apples, and his wife shaped the blanks into objects that looked like human ears. The scientists washed them to remove excess cells, leaving a cellulose framework. Then, like before, they seeded it with human cells, which quickly grew. The ears are ready. But if we dig even deeper into history, one of the first videos of an experiment on an animal filmed 120 years ago definitely can't be called humane. The circus elephant Topsy, who had a reputation as a killer and had become extremely aggressive by that time, ended up being unwanted by anyone, and the circus management decided to put the animal down. At the same time, enterprising hustlers even decided to charge a fee to watch the execution, which outraged the local Animal Protection Society. As a result, they decided not to charge a fee. Well, they decided to kill the elephant using electric current. For this, they turned to the company of the famous physicist Thomas Edison, which agreed to take part in this event. Edison's proposal aimed to serve his business interests, not to ease the elephant's suffering. By the 1900s, the electric chair existed, and the war of currents had begun, as we discussed in another episode. A brief reminder: Thomas Edison promoted direct current for city lighting, while George Westinghouse and Nikola Tesla supported alternating current. Both opposed using their system in execution devices, fearing it would damage their reputation and link their names to death. Edison seized a chance to showcase the deadly power of alternating current, even killing an elephant to damage his rival's reputation publicly. The local Society of Forensic Doctors was very impressed by the execution and recommended it for use. And the New York Times reported, "Alternating current will undoubtedly put the executioner out of work." This story also shows the rapid pace of scientific and technological progress. But let's move to another part of the world and remember this. In 1925, Mikhail Bulgakov wrote a fantastic story about Professor Preobrazhensky, who practiced the transplantation of monkey sex glands to rejuvenate his wealthy patients. One day, he conducted a global-scale experiment, transplanting male testicles with appendages, spermatic cords, and the pituitary gland into a dog. To the modern reader, the plot's premise may seem like pure fiction, but in the 1920s, the original method of rejuvenating the body. Discussion about the sex glands was widespread, as well as the name of its creator, who became the prototype for Bulgakov's professor, the French surgeon of Russian origin, Sergei Alexandrovich, or Samuil Abramovich Voronov. In 1884, 18-year-old Sergei left Voronezh to study medicine in Paris at the Sorbonne, where he became interested in endocrinology and transplantology. He studied under the surgeon and eugenicist Alexis Carrel. Since 1889, he worked under the supervision of the physiologist Charles Brown-Séquard, who put forward the hypothesis about the positive effects of extracts from sex glands on the body. From there, he went to Egypt as a doctor, where he worked until 1910. In Cairo, the doctor watched eunuchs. The absence of a beard, small skull, obesity, high-pitched voice, flabbiness of the muscles, sluggish thinking, poor memory, and lack of energy led Voronov to the idea that the absence of the testes has a destructive effect on the functioning of the endocrine organs and on the condition of the body as a whole. Similar symptoms were observed in healthy older men, which indicated a gradual decline in the function of the endocrine organs, causing aging. And Sergei Voronov decided to influence the endocrine organs by transplanting donor organs. According to the doctor's idea, the new gland was supposed to restore normal vital functions and slow down the aging process. But how could you make a foreign gland survive in a body where it was artificially implanted? Voronov began experimental research to solve this question in 1913 at the physiological station of the Collège de France. At first, he worked on the transplantation technique and studied the body's reaction to a foreign organ. Before transplanting testicular glands, he experimented with simpler organs like the thyroid gland. Thus, in 1914, he cured a 14-year-old teenager who showed signs of dementia as a result of having had measles. After transplanting the right lobe of a baboon's thyroid gland into the patient's neck, the patient became more lively and active, his face regained a healthy color, and his mental activity returned to normal. This method of Dr. Voronov was recognized as a salvation for a large number of adults, and especially children who were doomed to a vegetative life. In 1913-1915, Voronov operated on a 20-year-old young man who looked like a 10-year-old child, lifeless and apathetic, able to utter only a few articulate words. As a donor gland, the surgeon used the patient's mother's gland. The operation went smoothly, and by year's end, the young man grew, lost his apathy, became alert, and spoke clearly. It became clear the recipient's body could likely accept the transplanted gland. During World War I, Voronov transplanted bone tissue to the wounded, using, whenever possible, the patient's own bone tissue. In this case, it would take root more quickly. Finally, the scientists began experiments on the sex glands. Tissues from a young goat or ram were transplanted into the glands of an old animal. As a result, the old, weakened animals regained their appetite, became more agile, and grew thicker fur. On June 12, 1920 in Paris, Sergei Voronov performed the first transplantation of a monkey's sex gland into a human. As a result, the person experienced an increase in strength and energy. The allotted time was published and shown with before and after patient photos. Between 1920 and 1924, Voronov performed 52 transplants of monkey sex glands. The patients were between 40 and 59 years old or over 70, experiencing symptoms of old age. Most of the operated patients showed improvements in their physical and mental condition. The effect of the surgery lasted from several weeks to 2 years. For example, here are 74 patients. Voronov, an English official for 3 years, approached Voronov in 1920. He was an overweight, hunched old man with flabby features, a dull expression, and walked with a cane. Very weakened memory. The mind works sluggishly and slowly. After the operation performed in February 1921, the Englishman lost half of his excess weight, was cheerful, with a clear look, stood straight, went to Switzerland, and climbed mountains there. A positive result was not guaranteed, but nevertheless, people wishing to rejuvenate themselves came to Voronov from all over the world. The claim that transplanting monkey sex organs into humans produces a rejuvenating effect, even if only for a limited period, sparked great public interest. "My wife," wrote chemist Morozov to the scientist in 1924, "was with me in St. Petersburg when I received your book, 43 Monkey-to-Human Transplants in French. She was so fascinated that without your permission, she arranged with Niga Publishing for its immediate Russian release and began translating it right away. And now I'm taking her translation with me to submit it to the publisher. Sending my regards. My wife hopes you'll have a small monkey for me too when I'm old and weak." In 1924-1925, Voronov traveled to Algeria, Morocco, Sudan, Senegal, Guinea, and Niger to train veterinarians in transplantation for better livestock breeds. As a result of the grafts performed by Dr. Voronov, the test subjects showed increased hair growth. According to the foreign press, wrote Soviet Izvestia in 1925, the scientist performed rejuvenation surgeries on Clemenceau and Lloyd George themselves. Scientists discussed Voronov's work, with some thinking the before and after rejuvenation images he presented were convincing enough. It was enough to be convinced that we are dealing here with real rejuvenation, and moreover, one that lasts for several years. Others criticized the gland transplantation method and advised potential patients to change their lifestyle, eat properly, exercise, and get fresh air. One way or another, Voronov's rejuvenation continued to attract widespread attention for a long time. Over time, Voronov's popularity began to fade. In the 1930s, scathing articles began to appear more and more frequently in newspapers, and then the rejuvenation theory was completely disproved. However, it is impossible to deny that his experimental research gave an impetus to the development of transplantology and endocrinology. Practice showed that although testicle transplantation could stimulate sexual activity and libido for a while, it did not restore a worn-out heart. Other organs necessary for vital activity. A highly successful English lord. His patient, rejuvenated by monkey hormone injections, died 2 years later due to his own lack of restraint. The other patients also didn't live long. Those who once applauded Voronov now mocked him. The doctor took the criticism hard, spent years depressed, then immersed himself in work, into the pleasures his patients had longed for so much. Endless parties, travels, and love affairs. He got married for the third time. His third wife, the stunning beauty Gertie or Gertrude, was 49 years younger than him. An Austrian subject, Romanian by origin, a cousin, and the official mistress of the Romanian king. Voronov died on September 3, 1951, at the age of 85 in Lausanne, Switzerland. This was the real-life model for Professor Preobrazhensky from Heart of a Dog. In fact, when it comes to the ethics of such experiments, the question of animal intelligence is quite important. And in this regard, researchers have uncovered a lot of interesting things. Let's start with this amazing fact. Cuttlefish have passed a cognitive test that was originally designed for children. So now we can officially take off our crown. We're not the only intelligent beings on Earth. I'm talking about the Stanford marshmallow experiment. Stanford really comes up with all sorts of things, the results of which show that there's more going on in the little brains of cuttlefish than we previously thought. The marshmallow test is pretty simple. Children are placed in a room with a marshmallow. They're told that if they can avoid eating the marshmallow for 15 minutes, they'll get a second marshmallow and be able to eat both. This ability to delay gratification demonstrates cognitive skills such as planning for the future. This test, in particular, helps determine at what age a person is smart enough to delay gratification if it means a better outcome. But later, some primates, like dogs, have demonstrated the ability to delay gratification, although inconsistently. Crows have also passed the marshmallow test. 6 cuttlefish were placed in a special tank with 2 closed chambers with transparent doors, so the animals could see what was inside these chambers. And there were treats in the chambers. A less preferred piece of raw king prawn in one, and a much more preferred live shrimp in the other. The researchers found that all the cuttlefish decided to wait for their favorite food, live shrimp. But in the control group, they realized they wouldn't get it, so they didn't wait. The experiment had several parts, but the main conclusion is that cuttlefish are capable of self-control, but it's completely unclear why. In species like parrots, primates, and crows, delayed gratification is linked to factors such as tool use, since that requires planning ahead, storing food for the future, and social competence, because social behavior, like providing food for everyone, benefits social species. But cuttlefish don't use tools, don't hide food, and aren't particularly social. All pet lovers like to talk about the intelligence of dogs. They are loyal, obedient, and great at following commands. But intelligence isn't just about obeying orders. Many wild animals are just as smart as dogs. We just don't notice it. Today, we'll meet real geniuses from the wild. These incredible animals drive cars, solve the most difficult tests, and have even mastered sign language. Let's begin with the most ordinary piggies. Did you know that pigs can distinguish shapes and colors and easily put together children's puzzles? And this piglet is completing a task that many people can't handle. He's sorting trash. The pig is picking up plastic cups from the floor and putting them in the yellow box and crumpled paper in the blue one. Of course, pigs don't sort trash in nature, but they did figure out how to use tools. To dig juicy roots out of the ground, this pig uses not its own snout, but a stick. Here are some more cuties. Scientists claim that raccoons have the intelligence of a 3-year-old child, but this little animal turned out to be smarter than some adults. The raccoon walks around the metal trap in a wide arc, but in the cage, there's a bowl of delicious-smelling food. The raccoon comes in from the other side, shakes the trap, and the bowl flips over, spilling the food onto the floor. Excellent result. The small animal scoops food through the grate into its mouth. For tasty food, raccoons are ready for any feat. Moving from bowl to bowl, the little animal turns the latch and opens the doors locked with a hook. The first hook took some effort, but then Yenot got the hang of it and opened the second hook blindly. This guy would make an excellent burglar. But raccoons face tough competition from African honey badgers. A young male named Stoffel learned how to unlatch the lock on his own cage. Each night, the 4-legged troublemaker stirs up fights with other zoo animals. To put an end to this mess, the keeper secured the latch on Stoffel's enclosure with strong wire. After only 5 minutes, the honey badger climbed the mesh and tore off the wire with his claws. The keeper put a proper lock on the cage and locked it with a key, but Stoffel dug a tunnel underneath. After that, the zoo staff realized that it was impossible to keep a honey badger in a regular cage, so they built a real concrete Alcatraz. To prevent the little animal from getting bored, they installed a wooden pull-up bar in the enclosure. Stoffel was pleased. He broke the pull-up bar, dragged the log to the wall, and got out. The caretaker removed all the logs from the enclosure. Stoffel put his mind to work, gathered some stones, built a pyramid out of them, and went for a walk. The caretaker removed the stones. The honey badger sighed in disappointment, piled up some dirt, and, well, you get the idea? To be continued. In the end, the concrete enclosure for the honey badgers turned into a real prison cell. But even that didn't stop Stoffel. The honey badger uses any suitable tools, rakes, shovels, car tires, and still manages to escape from the enclosure. While the honey badgers are building stone pyramids, rats have mastered driving a car. And that's no joke. Scientists from the University of Richmond have actually taught rats how to drive. The animal climbs into these tiny little cars and presses the levers, making the car go straight or turn. The rats have learned to perform complex maneuvers and can drive along a set route. But the most amazing thing is that the rats actually enjoyed driving the car. Initially, the animals did tricks only when interested, but now they drive around the enclosure for fun. By the way, respectful attitudes toward animals sometimes take interesting forms. For example, in the United Kingdom, the world's first hedgehog recreation park has already opened. The hedgehog population in the United Kingdom is rapidly declining. In the 1950s, there were 30 million, but by 2018, only 500,000 remained. Many died during hibernation because shrinking forests from urbanization made secluded spots scarce, and predators also killed them. A cozy place will help. Park Dean Resorts, which manages parks across England, says the area will become a safe winter refuge for hedgehogs. However, this care doesn't always seem humane. In the same United Kingdom, the government approved a project to use oral contraceptives to control the growing population of gray squirrels. This invasive species causes damage to the forests of the United Kingdom, amounting to £1.8 billion per year. The plan to control squirrel birth rates is based on small pots with bait, which will contain hazelnut paste pre-mixed with contraceptives. In this way, they plan to reduce the population of these rodents by 90%. Here is a chimpanzee named Ayumu, who has proven that his short-term memory is better than that of Japanese students. In the first stage of the test, everything was simple. The monkey was shown numbers from 1 to 9, randomly scattered across the monitor. In just 4 seconds, Ayumu pressed them in ascending order. In the second stage, the task became much more difficult. The numbers appeared in front of the monkey for only 0.4 seconds, Then white squares appeared on the monitor instead of the numbers, and Ayumu had to open them in ascending order. The chimpanzee scored over 80% on the difficult test, while Japanese college students got just 40%. But that's not the limit yet. Look, this is the world's smartest gorilla named Coco. She understood 2,000 words in English and could reproduce 1,000 words in sign language. Coco mastered concepts from her environment: table, banana, person, distinguished past from future, and learned abstract terms like love, boredom, and imagination. Coco even learned how to swear. "You're a dirty, bad toilet." That's what Coco called the monkey who broke her favorite toy. It sounds funny, but think about it. The gorilla drew an analogy between the monkey and a toilet, combining them by a completely non-obvious trait. Isn't that evidence of abstract thinking? The monkey could discuss its feelings and understood other animals' experiences. Seeing a bridled horse, Coco pointed at Noddle and gestured that the horse had a toothache. Her ability to empathize was so strong that the gorilla had her own pets. She raised several kittens, took care of them, petted them, and fed them. This incredible gorilla even mastered humor. Sometimes Coco called herself a little bird and pretended that she could fly. At first, the trainers thought the ape was using the wrong signs, but Coco explained that it was a joke. Many actions of this incredible ape were completely indistinguishable from those of humans. One day, Coco got angry and tore the sink out of the wall. When she was asked how it happened, the gorilla explained with gestures that it was the cat's doing. But is there any child who hasn't used a similar lie? "Mom, it wasn't me who dropped the plate. It was the cat." Birds are just as intelligent as animals. To test the intelligence of crows, scientists built a complex puzzle like this. In natural conditions, birds also develop clever strategies. Meet the drongo bird. In the wilds of Africa, the drongo acts as a security alarm. When a predator appears, the bird sounds an alarm, causing all savanna inhabitants to flee. You might already admire the nobility of this little black bird. Then, take a look at this. The meerkat family digs worms out of the ground. Drongo watches their efforts for a while, then gives an alarm call. Dropping the worms, the meerkats rush to their burrows, and the bird swoops down and grabs the food. Yes, you understood correctly. There was no predator. Drongo lied. You see an octopus on the screen, and it's actually there. These cephalopods look like a meaningless tangle of tentacles, but in reality, octopuses are no less intelligent than dolphins. Just look at this. A tiny octopus is dragging 2 halves of a coconut behind it, and this one grabbed a couple of shells. For octopuses, this is a heavy, inconvenient load, but these items give them a long-term hunting advantage. When the octopus spots prey, it quickly climbs into its shelter, closes the shells, and waits. An unsuspecting crab calmly crawls along the bottom. Surprise! I'm here! The octopus is as smart as an early human who used a stone to hunt. Cephalopods can also perform complex tasks, such as unscrewing jars. Notice that the octopus doesn't even try to force the lid off. He understands that brute force won't solve the problem. The octopus braces the lid with his tentacles and slowly twists it. And if you train an octopus a little, he can even take photographs. The mollusk's movements seem chaotic, but that's just an illusion. The octopus constantly watches the tourists through the aquarium glass. Visitors must stand in front of a special poster, and only then will the 8-armed photographer press the shutter. The trainers say that the octopus mastered this process in just a few tries. Looking at experiments like these, you start to wonder, are we really the only intelligent species on the planet? And if we're so smart and have surpassed animals, how exactly did we do it? Scientists have proposed a theory about how this happened. It's strange, but we have to share it with you. The theory of the stoned ape is being seriously considered. Ethnobotanist and psychedelic advocate Terence McKenna, in his book Food of the Gods, The Search for the Original Tree of Knowledge, claimed that Homo erectus evolved into Homo sapiens thanks to an encounter with magic mushrooms containing the psychedelic psilocybin. He called this the stoned ape hypothesis. McKenna claimed that psilocybin caused a rapid reorganization of the primitive brain's ability to process information. This, in turn, triggered a rapid evolution of cognitive abilities, which led to the emergence of early art, language, and technology. As early humans, he says, we ate our way to higher consciousness by consuming these mushrooms, which he believed grew on animal dung. He says psilocybin lifted us from the animal mind into a world of speech and imagination. McKenna, who died in 2000, passionately believed in his hypothesis, but during his lifetime, it was never seriously considered by the scientific community. However, a presentation at Psychedelic Science 2017, a scientific conference on psychedelics attended by scientists, doctors, and artists who believe in the therapeutic potential of these drugs, revived interest in the theory. Paul Stamets, a well-known mycologist studying psilocybin, spoke in support of the stoned ape hypothesis with his talk, Psilocybin Mushrooms and the Mycology of Consciousness. "I'm presenting this to you because I want to bring back the concept of the stoned ape," said Stamets to the audience. "It's very important for you to understand that 200,000 years ago, the human brain suddenly doubled in size, and there is no explanation for this sudden change in the human brain. Now let's take a look at the experiments on social animals that opened scientists' eyes to many mysteries of human community behavior. Rats, along with pigs, monkeys, and politicians, are physiologically and intellectually close to humans. That's why scientists love conducting various experiments on them. Rodents have gotten used to this, and often turn these experiments into a grim mirror of human social hierarchy. Let's take a look at 3 experiments on rats that showed people something they didn't quite expect to see: gallity and apality. French researcher Didier Desor from the University of Nancy published an interesting study in 1994 called A Study of the Social Hierarchy of Rats in Water Immersion Experiments. Initially, 6 white laboratory rats participated in the experiment. When it was time to feed them, they were placed in a glass box with a single exit at the top. This exit was a tunnel staircase that descended to the bottom of a neighboring glass enclosure. A feeder was mounted on the water tank wall so the rat could swim up from the tunnel and grab a biscuit. However, in order to eat this biscuit, it was necessary to return back to the solid surface of the staircase. A certain hierarchy quickly formed among the 6 participants in this experiment. 2 rats became exploiters. They didn't swim themselves, but took food away from the 3 exploited swimmers. The 6th rat chose a self-sufficiency strategy. It would dive for the biscuit and successfully fend it off from the other rats. The most interesting part is that, regardless of how many times the scientist repeated the experiment with different rats, the same role distribution always happened. Even when the scientist grouped only exploiters, only slaves, or only independents together, their community always returned to the original hierarchy. The scientists then increased the group size, but the result was even more surprising. Dr. Desor placed 200 rats in the test cage. They fought all night. In the morning, there were 3 lifeless victims of the social cataclysm, and a complex system of subordination had formed in the rat community. Lieutenants brought food to the generals after taking it from the worker swimmers. At the same time, in addition to the autonomous ones, another class emerged: the beggars. They didn't swim or fight, just ate crumbs from the floor. Dr. Desor wouldn't be a true scientist without sacrificing his test subjects for science. After dissection, it turned out that all the rats experienced increased levels of stress during the experiment. However, what surprised the scientists most was that the highest level of stress was experienced not by the oppressed swimmers, but by the exploiters. At the time, this work caused quite a stir. Scientists made grim conclusions about society's fate, the futility of revolutions, and our inherent instinct for social injustice. The view is certainly categorical, but it seems there's something to it. Morphine and entertainment. In the late 1970s, Canadian researcher Bruce Alexander concluded that rats lacked entertainment. Dr. Alexander wasn't particularly original. He decided to study the formation of drug addiction. A Canadian scientist volunteered to prove that the persistent addiction of rats to drugs, which is demonstrated by numerous experiments, was caused by the fact that the test animals were locked in cramped cages, and they simply had no other choice but to entertain themselves with drug injections. To confirm his theory, Dr. Alexander built a kind of rat amusement park, a spacious dwelling that had tunnels, exercise wheels, play balls, cozy nests, and plenty of food. Is it just me? Or do lab rats have it better than us? 20 rats of both sexes were placed in this amusement park. The control group, on the other hand, was crowded into classic cages. Both groups were given 2 water bottles, one with regular water and the other with a sweetened solution. The morphine experiment turned out to be truly impressive. Alexander's theory was confirmed. The inhabitants of the regular cages became addicted to morphine very quickly. But the happy inhabitants of the park completely ignored the drug. However, some of the park rats did try the morphine water a few times, as if they wanted to make sure of the effect. As a rule, these were females, but none of them showed regular addiction. Alexander seized the chance to toy with his ward's destinies. At a certain point, he switched the park rats and the rats from the regular cage. It was only logical that the park rodents, who suddenly and inexplicably found themselves in cramped living conditions, immediately became addicted to morphine. But those who were moved to the park turned out to be more cunning. They continued to use the drug, but less regularly, just enough to experience euphoria and maintain their basic functions. In fact, these experiments by Dr. Alexander fundamentally shook the dominant theory in medical circles about the chemical origin of opioid addiction, which addicts are unable to control. The scientific community acted as if nothing happened and kept the experiment quiet. Universe 25. Imagine paradise-like conditions, plenty of food and water, no predators or diseases, and enough space for reproduction. A kind of heaven on earth. But the inhabitants of this paradise are not people, but mice. However, paradise quickly emptied. Why did this happen? What caused such a sudden extinction? And what lessons should humanity learn from this experiment? American scientist and ethologist John Calhoun conducted experiments in the 1960s and 1970s, and although Calhoun always chose rodents for his experiments, his ultimate goal was to predict the future of society as a whole. This was an experiment called Universe 25. The name of this experiment was not accidental. Keep watching and you'll find out why. Calhoun tried to analyze how high population density affects human behavior. Sociologists and anthropologists wondered, are we reproducing too fast? As a species, is humanity reproducing too quickly? In a 12-square-meter cube, 4 pairs of mice were placed. Paradise-like conditions were maintained for the mice, optimal temperature and cleanliness. The mice had unlimited access to food, water, and materials for nest building. Calhoun calculated that up to 9,500 people could comfortably live in this tank at once. The original settlers of Mouse Paradise enthusiastically mate. The scientist called this period Stage A. The next stage, called Stage B, began when the first offspring were born. The rodent population doubled every 55 days, but this was short-lived. By day 315 of the experiment, scientists saw the mice reproducing at about a third of their previous rate. Now, it took at least 145 days for the population to double. This became evidence of the next phase's onset. This is when things get most interesting. The change from mouse paradise to mouse hell. By this point, the previously peaceful community of Mouse Paradise had changed significantly. Inside Mouse Paradise, a caste hierarchy had formed, led by the older individuals. The older mice suddenly began to show sadistic tendencies. They bit the young mice on their tails and got into fights for no reason. Their cruelty led the young ones to form a caste of outcasts who had no place in the group. The leaders repeatedly provoked the young ones into fighting, forcing the young males into the enclosure's center. Initially, the young mice accepted the challenge, but soon lost strength and became depressed. Still, they kept reproducing. The population size continued to increase. But along with it, so did the unchecked aggression of its members. What ruled this mouse kingdom now? Cannibalism, homosexuality, beauty, and death. Gradually, the harassed young males lost the desire to protect females and to mate. The behavior of the females also changed. Deprived of the protection of weakened males, they themselves became aggressive. Now, protecting their offspring became an unbearable burden for them. It came to cannibalism. The females ate their offspring, retreated to the mouse monastery, moved to upper nests, and stopped reproducing. In this entire ugly mouse world, homosexuality flourished. Bitten males mated with other equally miserable males. But still, in this mouse house, there were some individuals who desperately continued their lineage. But the most terrifying period of Universe 25 began when the beauties appeared in society. These were rodents who completely refused any social contact and focused only on themselves, eating, sleeping, and grooming their fur. They didn't resemble the ragged outcasts, who at least could still stand up for the life of the colony. And here began the final phase, called Phase D, the death phase. The young ones, exhausted from the beatings, gave up resistance and social contact. During this time, older people outlived the young and refused to give up their positions. The mouse paradise fell into depression as reproduction ceased and the population began to die out. Calhoun suggested that if the mice exhausted by fights were returned to their previous conditions, social relationships would be restored. He removed 4 pairs of mice from the main tank and put them in a separate container to restart the experiment. This didn't change anything. The rodents continued to behave inappropriately. The ability for normal development and reproductive behavior was lost irreversibly. When the population reached 122 rodents, the last reproductive female died. Those who survived were hermits and still didn't want to interact with each other. The experiment concluded on the final day of Mouse Utopia, the 1780th day of the study. Universe 25 was the experiment's name because he had conducted 25 of them. This was the last one. All 25 experiments ended with the complete extinction of the population. In his work, Population Density and Social Pathology, Calhoun, along with Universe 25, buried all of humanity as well. Even before we run out of resources, people will suffocate in their cities. I'd like to say he'll have to wait, but look around. Maybe there's really something to it? Write in the comments. That's all for now. Give this episode a rating if it made you think, and see you in the next episodes on our channel.